God's mind dreams your mind. The empty awareness called God dreams that he is me who lives here in this house and does all kinds of things here. And I think that I do that. But I don't do that because I am his dream object. What is experienced in the dream is lived by me as a part. And God, who dreams me that experiences that, experiences how that is. Now he knows the way in this house and these happenings. Through dream Anya, the dream I, in the dream, everything is not experienced by me. For I am a particle, object. Like a bicycle does not experience how nature around looks like or the road where it rides on. Only the cyclist experiences it. The empty awareness experiences appearances through the appearances and realizes now what it is. That it is not the appearances, but through the appearances, that it is this empty awareness. I am now empty awareness. I am contented. That it knows then. God has to bring himself asleep to experience, so there seems to come a separated subject of experiences, from whose point of view it knows a separate world or object. So God dreams himself into the separation. And in that separation he knows a separate world. So if you have to fall asleep and have to dream that you are someone else, from that aspect of the other, you can experience what it's like to experience the most crazy things. And in that dream that you experience with the craziest things, you cannot experience it, for you are one of those things. It is the dreamer God who experiences it via those fictions. Then it looks like God is a separated subject that is experienced. No, this figure I through which he can know, this sees all outside of itself. When God dreams me, and I would experience all in that dream, then I see all outside of me. But God sees both me as well as the things that happen inside himself. So if you look only from within yourself, who experiences all, you are here and the world is outside of you. But if you have a higher consciousness and you see that you are actually that God that dreams you, that experiences the world, then God sees you and the world inside of him. So for letting God experiencing himself, he must fantasize a figure who seems separated from him and who goes into the world. And for this figure I, the world is outside of it. But for God, both the figure I as the world are within him. God falls himself asleep and dreams he is me, in order to learn to know this place. My mind is a limited part of God's mind. From my mind I only see the world, and from God's mind he sees the world and me. This limitation enables God to know the world. From my point of view, part of my experiences through thoughts and feelings seem to take place inside of me. And another part of my experiences called the world seem to take place outside of me. So there is a separation in the dream figure that I am in God's dream. This is right from my point of view, and I notice when I close my eyes, the world outside disappears and returns when I open my eyes again. So this knowing, this mind, must be behind my eyes. Eyes open, I see the world. Eyes closed, I don't see the world. I don't know it. I think that this my knowing is inside of me, but the world that I see outside of me and the mind that is inside me, with which I can see outside of me, are both in God's mind who dreams me. My inner and outer world are God's undivided insight. God's undivided consciousness takes voluntary each of our mind forms. So each of our minds is a dream. In the mind, the undivided consciousness, which is God. It means we are all being dreamed. Each of our minds is the tool through which consciousness can realize a segment of its eternal potency. Consciousness looks through our limited mind and sees itself as the world. Unlimited consciousness takes voluntarily the form of the limited mind, and through that mind, the I, it sees itself as the world. God needs us to be able to see that limitation. When my mind looks at the world, I think that the limitations that I see in the world belong to the world. I think that the world is temporal and limited. No. It's my mind that is limited. And I project my limitations on what I see. When my mind recognizes its true nature, so when my mind realizes that in reality it belongs to God, that it is not my limited mind, then what I see becomes liberated from the limitations that my mind projects on that world. And that world will appear not as a multiplicity and variety of objects, but as God's face, what he looks like. All this what I see and is limited for me is in reality God's face. So each of our minds are windows through which God sees himself as the world. And each of our minds realizes or activates a segment of God's potency, of his endless, unlimited truth, his power, his possibility. God needs our mind to know himself as the world. But he does not need our mind to know himself as it is. He knows himself by being himself and by himself as himself. So God does not need anything to know God, but he needs the mind, the limitation, to know the world. When he knows the world, he knows himself. Or you know yourself. The understanding of that I makes that I die. That it loses interest in the world and it becomes relaxed. It starts to see that mind is a part, and it is not something, that the mind is not something as Anya's or your mind. What I thought that was my mind starts to see that there is not such thing as my mind. And therefore that mind goes back and sinks in its source. In a certain state, there is the recognition there exists not such a thing as Anya's or your mind. The mind with which I seem to know my experiences, that temporal mind with which I seem to know experiences, is a modulation of God's timeless, unlimited mind. That is an experience of peace. The Anya I thinks, I experience peace. The I always pulls everything to itself. So there is peace when the I is gone. And the Anya I starts to think it feels peace. I experience peace. And that is my experience of peace. No, although you feel that peace is God's nature. So that peace, which is God's nature that you feel, makes you come out of your ego and go merge into the Spirit of God, and that is peace. But the limitations of my mind, by understanding it, it dies. And this mind is relaxed, and thereby the mind loses its limitations and has become free as God's infinite internal peace. And that full spirit then becomes experienced. That is the experience of peace and happiness. It is the recognition that our mind is God's mind. Death can make us feel that. The death of the body can cause the death of the limitations of the ego. For instance, in dangerous sports, you put yourself in a death process and force yourself to wake up and realize, I am God. It is euphoria to overwin your fear of death or to overwin your ego I. And then peace is experienced by that dying, or there is waking up. That's what people do in dangerous sports. And meditation is the same process of death. The fear of death can, by searching extreme circumstances, make the silence of peace be felt. Also praying, surrendering, letting go of everything, leaving everything to enter God's presence. It's that part of God in which we live and move and abide. And drink and drugs and sex and excesses, all of that silences the desire of the mind. And when it is so, the desire of the mind has been silenced, then that peace comes forward. Everybody searches the same peace in experiences to lose themselves. Those longings, that fear disappears. Then the peace of awareness appears. Also, to obtain object silences the mind. Wanting something and then to have it is temporary a silent mind, and this seems to make appear this peace that was hidden, that seemed to be absent, but it is hidden behind that mind. And this peace that is behind the mind is the natural essence of the mind. It is not another substance. It is the original, indelible, inevitable nature of mind, spirit itself. peace. And the I, Anya, connects in all activities, like experiences, excesses, and undergoing all sorts of things, simply to bring that limited temporal mind to an end. And to have the recognition that it's God's recognition. It is from God. It is not a recognition of Anya, for that is gone. Anya is gone. The I is gone. So when it is recognized, that peace, it is God's recognition, because God is the only one present in my mind. But for God to recognize himself, oh, I am God, I woke up from the dream of separation. So Anya does not wake up, God wakes up and he says, I woke up from the dream that was Anya. The only reason that I connect with every activity, that I go into it, that is for God to recognize his spirit, the source of his spirit. In other words, God's mind is only known by God's mind. That's me then, because I recognize it. That I is no longer that limited little I, but now it is that great peace. I know my Lord by my Lord. There exists no other self than infinite consciousness. Infinite consciousness is the only self, if we could call it self. Consciousness sleeps in minerals, dreams in plants, wakes up in animals, becomes self-aware in humans. It's not the question that it is by something other than itself, for there is nothing else than the self, and this is the only self that exists, that via all those little selves has reached itself now and recognized. Surely, verily, I am God. Thank you. All those experiences that I thought to have as a person are God's experiences, for which I have opened myself to live that through, so God in me may know himself, as if I stepped aside and given my place to God in me. And he has experienced everything as himself, while I thought that it was me. But this I has died now. Everything that is still here is the one true God. The one spirit that is actually free now from those experiences. But also those experiences are seen now as the only spirit of God, to be recognized everywhere, in and by you, in and around you. That is the peace that we have been looking for so long. And it is not recognized by the I, for the me is absorbed now in the peace. That's the true happiness. Consciousness sleeps in minerals, dreams in plants, wakes up in human beings. This me world disappears outside of me. I remain only I am.